Carla only has the best tech.
Can't connect to network.
But she didn't have the best internet. So she got Cox multi-gig speeds to power all her... Now, all her tech is...
Connected.
Exactly. Step it up with multi-gig speeds. Available everywhere. Only from Cox. 2 gig download speeds. Individual speeds vary. See cox.com for details.
You are listening to Women's Running Stories, where exceptional women runners share inspirational stories about their running experiences.
Hi there, my name is Vanessa Peralta-Mitchell. I'm owner of VCPM Inc. and the creator of the Game Changers program and the Powered program.
Yes, this episode features Vanessa Peralta-Mitchell. Vanessa is a runner, a certified run coach, and she is a force changing what leadership looks like in the running industry. But before we hear more from Vanessa, I do want to welcome you to Women's Running Stories. I am Cherie Louise Turner. I am the host and producer of this podcast, and I am so happy that you are here. Vanessa's story is truly inspirational, and we're going to get to it in just a minute. I do have one note up top here. I wanted to let you know that Women's Running Stories now has a weekly newsletter. It comes out on Thursdays. Every week, I talk about what's new on the show, what's coming up, what's happening in my own training, what I'm learning, discovering, excited about. I highlight a running resource that another woman is creating that I find inspirational or interesting or that I just love, whether it be a newsletter or a book or a podcast. And I put in other content about life and running because they do meld and merge. And yeah, my running is not separate from my life, and my life is not separate from my running. So I pull in other things from the rest of my life that are influencing what's going on in my running life as well. So please check it out. You can subscribe. It's on Substack. I will provide a link to how you can find it in the show notes, or you can go to Substack and search for Women's Running Stories. Now, on to Vanessa's episode. I am really excited to feature Vanessa on the podcast. When I scheduled her interview late last year, a couple of months ago, I realized when I looked at the schedule that her episode was going to publish as the first episode of 2025. And I thought, what a great way to start the new year with such a powerful and inspirational story. And just to give you some context here, Vanessa is the founder of Game Changers. Game Changers is an organization that supports women of color to become run coaches and leaders in the running space. Each year, a group of women is chosen to go through a certified coaching program, to get mentorship, and also to get support and guidance in building their business. So it is a very comprehensive program to set these women up to be successful leaders and experts in the running space. And through this work, building this community of experts and leaders, Vanessa is helping to change the face of what leadership looks like in the running industry. And it was all sparked by her own experiences. The other initiative that recently launched through Game Changers is the Powered program. And Powered is PWRHER''D. Powered is a program that partners with races and gives entrants to the race an opportunity to sign up for online coaching services that get them ready for that race specifically so they can be well prepared to have a successful experience. Also, when Powered partners with a race, they make a contribution to the local community on behalf of the partnership. That is, they also give back. So, Vanessa wears many hats. Game Changers, Powered, her own coaching services, and all of this is under the umbrella of her company, VCPM Inc. I will provide a link to all of the different ways that you can keep up with Vanessa and the work that she does in the show notes. One quick detail up top here. Vanessa does mention KV Switzer, and that is Catherine Switzer. Catherine is very well known for being the first woman to wear a number and officially cross the finish line at the Boston Marathon. That was back in 1967. And Catherine has gone on to be a very big advocate and force in the running industry, advocating for women up until this very day. All right. Now let's get to it. Let's hear Vanessa Peralta-Mitchell's running story, beginning at the beginning with what inspired her to start running in the first place. Here to tell her story is Vanessa Peralta-Mitchell.
I believe I was in college, home at the time, and in our living room. So I'm a Jersey girl. I grew up in North Jersey, born and raised. And my mom was close by. She was in the living room, but she wasn't actually watching this documentary with me. And I just happened to come across this documentary that was on women in sports. And it really intrigued me because it started giving this narration about how women weren't given equal opportunity in a various amount of sports, and it talked anything about from soccer or basketball or running. And I didn't really have a connection at the time to running. So just the fact that it talked about different sports, that intrigued me right away. And it also was kind of baffling to me that some of the, or if not all of the scenarios they were giving were not that long ago. So here I am, I was probably 20 something years old in my parents' living room, my mom close by. Again, not really watching it with me, but she's hard at work. She helped my father build the business. They both came here from Ecuador, so she's the backbone of my father's business, and always hard at work at the kitchen table. But as I'm sitting there and watching this story unfold, like story after story after story, really showing how much women had fought to have equality within the world of sports, and everything that they had to do to simply show up in a space to create a feeling of belonging and just to, fight for something that I felt that I was taking for granted, which is just to participate in sports. Now, I did grow up in high school. I did play a lot of sports. In college, that changed a bit, but never anything that was really tied me, again, to running. But in seeing this documentary, I felt that, I wanted to pay homage to all these women in some way. Like, that's how much this documentary moved me. I wanted to pay respect to what these women had did for not just themselves, but in essence for all of us. And in that moment, not even to my mom, but to myself, I told myself that I'm going to run a marathon. And mind you, I don't have any connection at that point to long distance running. And it just was the most, to me, realistic, that's with strong air quotes, because I couldn't just up and play a professional sport. I couldn't join a soccer team for professional teams or basketball or any other, tennis or anything like that. But running to me felt like, okay, I could do that. And I don't know how long it's going to take me, but I'm going to accomplish that goal. And in that moment, I promised myself that I would. And it took a really long time, but it was definitely that documentary that I specifically remember seeing KV Switzer's story in terms of the first, woman to officially cross the Boston Marathon. And I remember saying a couple years later that, seeing her story literally changed the trajectory of my own. Yeah, so after that documentary, it wasn't like this ignition of, passion for the sport and me wanting to go out there and, do my first race or even buy a pair of sneakers, and none of that. It was almost a seed I planted in myself in terms of I want to do that one day. And for me, it became something I added to a lifelong goal list. Now, it was a very short list. There was about maybe 4 things on there. And to me, being from North Jersey, the only thing that I knew about running was the New York City Marathon. So, when I made that goal, that audacious goal of running the New York City Marathon, not even having ran like a mile at that point, it was a really intimidating challenge for myself. But I kind of just sat on it. I made this small list, and it said lifelong goals. And I remember putting it on our refrigerator. And there sat this goal, this daily reminder that, one day I'm going to run the New York City Marathon. And I didn't really, take myself up on the challenge until it was years before I took myself up on the challenge. And honestly, it wasn't until after my husband and I had our first child, and he was my fiance at the time. So, at that point I had finished college, right? I had graduated, I had started working in New York City. Running and tackling that goal wasn't something top of mind. I probably even put that piece of paper in a folder and piled it somewhere, and all the moving from, I went to school in Philly, and then I moved back to Jersey, worked in New York. So a lot of time had passed in between. And I'm not sure exactly what made me want to revisit running, but I do know it was right after we had our son. And I remember I had moved back to the Philly area because my husband's from the Philly area. And, there was this local high school track. It was just like a gravel track, like an old school track. And the school is still there, but the track is so much nicer nowadays. But I have one picture from those early days. And that picture shows me in some old sweats, a huge baggy hoodie sweatshirt that was honestly probably my husband's, and the sneakers that I had from college. So really worn out sneakers. But to me, I'm running, I'm training, I'm doing this. Mind you, I had signed up for a 10K, didn't even know that 5Ks exist. And I probably could count on both my hands how many times I probably got out to run. Because for me, again, no connection, really green in this space of long distance running. I just thought I would just get out there a couple of times and then I'd be good to go. I'm not even sure I knew the distance of the 10K. I don't think I knew it was 6.2 miles. So being in that track, what I remember is my husband being in the stand, obviously the only one in the stand. This wasn't an event. This is just me getting out there doing my thing, and him having our son. So he was a couple months old and my husband's there kind of rooting for me. And then leading up to the actual race day, it didn't feel so good. It was a really harsh reality check for me, honestly. I had undertrained. I had probably all the wrong things, cotton shirt, old shoes, getting there barely in the nick of time. I went alone. I don't think I even had a phone. I don't have a picture, but all I had was my heart. I wanted to complete this. This was the beginning of my journey. And although I didn't title it that, I can look back and know that 10K race, which was so very, very difficult for me, I just had it in my heart that I was going to finish what I had set out to do. And I kind of hobbled along those last couple of yards because my legs were gone, everything that you can think of that I probably didn't do right. I was learning, so I can't really fault myself too much, but I do know that crossing that finish line, I was in tears, and there was not the happy kind. There was no self-reflection. There was no, I did that. And I felt that it's crazy, so crazy to think that that day could have been both my debut and my departure from running. And I think what really at the core of my being, I think that seed that I planted in my parents' living room in witness of my mom, even though she didn't know she was a witness, I think that was strong enough, right? That was strong enough to get me through and to not let that one experience defined how I wanted to continue in long distance running. So after I did that first 10K race, I once again probably set on the idea of doing a marathon. And I think it was layered, right? That was hard. That wasn't this grandioso experience that I might have thought it was going to be. But also, I was going through life transitions, right? So I had moved from, working in New York and living in North Jersey to down here near Philly, like the Philadelphia suburbs. I had just had a child. My husband, and back then at the time, him and I were fiance, engaged. And so there was a lot of transition going on. There was a lot of different stages of my life that was happening at once. So, going back to running, I realized that all the things that I had done, like that I could have done differently. And the biggest one was, not knowing how to train. I had really stereotyped what I thought it takes to get out there and run, and stereotyped it to thinking like, oh, I just need a pair of shoes and I go out there and just wing it. And that wasn't the case. So I knew I needed the support and the education. But the thing is, like, no one in my circles ran. Like, it wasn't a thing for anybody, not my family, not my friends. Like, I had no connection, no network of people to ask questions or look for advice. So I started searching, what kind of support could I find out there? And I came across a program that was offering group coaching. And that really changed things for me, because had I just tried to wing the next race, I'm not sure that would really put me in a position to find success in the sport, my own version of success in the sport. And so joining that group really gave me the knowledge, but also the fellowship with other people. So we were all training for the same distance. And at that time, I had to really evaluate what my goal was. And so, that piece of paper that was on that college girl's refrigerator said the New York City Marathon. And I started to realize, like, I'm in Philly now and I have a child and, I'm working full time, and it just would be really difficult for me to get to New York. Mind you, nowadays, you travel everywhere for a good race, but that's that's not the mindset I had, or the financial space that I was in. So I really had to think about understanding that I could still have this goal, and it's okay to change it. So literally that same piece of paper, I crossed out New York City Marathon and I wrote Philadelphia Marathon. And so even just going out my first day with the group, now that I think about it, it actually was quite intimidating, because the first run that they had us do was 4 miles. And to me, that was a lot, and what they were doing, though, is figuring out people's paces. And so that they can kind of put us, like, everyone on the green team or the orange team or the red team, and purple was fast. I know that. Well, all these different paces, and which was helpful, right? Because it allows you to find that connection with other people, that you can do the same pace, you can talk and start to build community. And what we did was we were building up, utilizing the coach's like training plan. We were able to build up our distance. So I remember running my first 10 miles and they gave us this little trophy. Let me tell you, like 10 miles might not seem like a lot to a lot of people who are doing the long distance. But for people that are just doing it for the first time, even a mile, I mean, not obviously you can't get these trophies for every distance accomplished, but just the fact that someone took a moment to acknowledge, like, 10 miles is a big deal and you need to take a moment and celebrate it. And I still have that little trophy. It's like this little square trophy with like this little sneaker on top of it. And oh my goodness, you couldn't tell me anything. That was my prized possession. Yeah, I might have like won the race, but like they did things like that and they built us up. We did, like, one of my first half marathons was PDR, the Philadelphia Distance Run. That was a very staple signature event in the Philly area, and the community that comes out and roots for everybody. So I started to get the feeling, right? The culture of running, that high, that feeling of accomplishment. I was finally feeling that. And I wasn't searching for that. I should say, I wasn't searching for that because, again, my mind and heart is set on, okay, I know I want to do this goal, and I just got to do what I got to do to get there. I think all the other things were so many like beautiful bonuses that I wasn't anticipating. So as I was training, I got close with these two women. I always give a shout out to Cassandra and Vicky. The three of us got close, and we trained for our first marathon, the Philadelphia Marathon. And that is an experience in of itself, but it was something that I didn't realize was a part of running. It seemed like such a solo sport, and it felt like such a you versus you, which it is, but the beauty of being able to bond with others because you're going through a challenge at the same time. There's something undeniable about that revelation, right? Like what's getting pulled out of you is getting pulled out of someone in their own way, right? But you're still able to like connect and have that commonality. And I really found that in Cassandra and Vicky. So Vicky, Cassandra, and I did the marathon together, and it was really sweet because Cassandra and I actually got to cross the finish line like holding hands, and so that was such a proclamation in so many ways. But after the Philly Marathon, I really kept with it. I wanted to continue my run journey. I felt all the things that it's so true. The journey to 26.2 is such a transformative experience, and it's so unique to each person that is dares to go on that journey. And so crossing that finish line, I continued doing long distance running. I continued doing races. I continued showing up, and I believe that and started to, show in ways to other people, whether they were runners or not. Now, at Philly, though, I did have a good group of friends come out, sorority sisters, my family, my parents were there, my goddaughter was there, and like college peers were there. So it was a lot of people knew like I'm running now, like this is a thing, and they made the signs. And so, it was like them checking in on me because they were also a part of this like monumental moment for me, so that they were kind of also like, hey, like, so when's your next race, or when are you going to do that? And as other people started to be more interested in running because they've never done it before, they would ask me questions, right? Because it's like, oh, you did a marathon, like, what kind of shoes should I get? Or like, I want to train for this, or like, how do I begin? Or where do you actually go for running? Like where like outside do you go? Do you run on the street? Do you run in the park? All these questions coming at me. And I started to feel like, oh, wow, like I'm like this go-to person that everyone wants to ask questions about. And then like they would tell other people that they're getting interested in. And so before I knew it, I was like, how they were viewing me, I was like this wealth of knowledge, this, living, breathing example of someone that did it. And I remember feeling like I wanted to honor what others saw in me, right? By getting some type of credential, right? Some type of quote unquote stamp of approval or some type of education. Like what could I do to feel, one, that I am meeting people's expectations, and two, that, I know for a fact there was that part of me that felt intimidated by that as well, right? Like, do I really know a lot? Like, am I really an expert in the sense of like, I did that, but like, I almost still felt new to running. Yeah, I did the races and the training and the marathon, but I was like, I'm still new here too, guys. So but it was such a subtle push, right, from my community of friends and family that really made me look into like, oh, like what could I do with this? And I did come across the certification for run coaching, and at the time it was just not within reach, whether like, physically the location wasn't within reach, or like financially the cost of it that wasn't in reach. So I kind of put that on the back burner and was one of those, okay, maybe someday. And I didn't really look into it past that because, we have family and all the things that you put priority over. So I would say right when I was pregnant with our third child, I was in a very secure position. I felt worked my way up to senior project manager for a market research firm. I was holding down two roles, the role of senior project manager, but also the role of representing the US for the social responsibility for all the offices in the US. I felt like really like established, and I had worked hard, and you do all the things that you're supposed to do when you work that corporate ladder and coming out of college and all those things. So I do remember when I was 7 months pregnant with our third child, I was called into HR's office, and me being very oblivious to what was happening, I had the dreaded conversation that you have from an HR person that is kindly letting you go and thanking you for the services that you provided. And I was really, really blindsided. Not only did I feel secure because of my role, my dual roles, but I was also 7 months pregnant. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't think that was even an option, that people could just say like, hey, like, we don't need you anymore, regardless of where you are in life. And like, good luck and thanks for all you did. So I was super internalizing, like any human being would when they're getting let go. I was super internalizing everything in that moment, and also feeling the emotions of being 7 months pregnant, So I really didn't, again, think about what am I going to do next? Oh, I'm going to like be a coach and change the industry. No, like none of that was on the table at all. I sulked, I cried, and I stayed there, long enough because I still had two other kids and a husband and things, that really would give me the motivation, right, to get up and continue going and finding, whether you want to think of it as purpose or my next job or my next career. But in that space, it gave me just enough leeway really to think about, well, what do I want to do with this next chapter of my life? Like, what do I really love? And being a senior project manager I felt accomplished, but I also, from day one, I always knew that wasn't my end all be all. I knew like I was there for a purpose, but I knew it wasn't my forever. And so I thought maybe, I believe in a higher power. I thought maybe this was in some way a gift and a message to really take pause and figure out, or at least have the courage to step in a direction. So I took that run coach certification idea off the shelf, and I kind of went all in with the idea that I'm going to get certified. I flew out to Boston. I took my first Uber to New Hampshire. I knew no one out there. I did leave my husband with all three kids. I believe my youngest was still nursing, so I had to leave him, milk for him to feed her, like all these crazy things. But I don't know, there was something that just told me like now, like do it now. You have the time now, like turn this sad moment into something that is, or could be at least, sensational, So I did it. My husband was on board, and probably if you ask him nowadays, either one of us probably don't even know like what was going through our heads at the moment, because it's not like run coaching is this like luxurious lifestyle, like you become a coach and you're rich and you're, no, that's like none of that comes with it. So I think it was just this moment of, I needed to challenge myself. I needed to choose that challenge. And maybe that's a bit of what running does too. Like you get to choose that challenge. And like I certainly didn't choose to get laid off. So I was like, I need to do this and I need to do it now. And so I did. And I did go out there and I attended the certification. It was, I don't know if I had any expectations. I know I was nervous. I know being in that room didn't help those nerves. And I think it wasn't something that I identified right away. But in leaving that room and then seeing very similar rooms and within the industry, I came to understand that I felt that a lot of the information one was felt like it was over my head. There was a lot of language that seemed very common, for others in the room. It seemed like standard language that everyone just was aware of, that everyone had this like secret encyclopedia or dictionary that I wasn't aware of. And honestly, it reminded me a little bit of the corporate world, because in the corporate world, I would often find myself in these conversations, and I, I almost felt like people were talking a different language. You know what I mean? I almost felt like how are you all talking about the same thing, and I have no idea what you're talking about. And what that does, when people around you are talking the same language, meaning using the same definitions and thinking that everyone understands this like standard idea of different terminology, right? When other people around you are talking in that same way, and you don't have, whether that's knowledge, access, or awareness of that same terminology, it makes you feel a bit less than. It makes you feel a bit intimidated. It makes you feel that what you have to say is very different. And a lot of times when you are different, it's not welcomed, right? Because no one else is speaking your terminology or your language. So there was a disconnect for me in that essence, because there was like this, basic understanding of maybe common terms or common phrases or common ideas within running, and who is the ones that are talking about it, right? And I wasn't them, right? So I did not understand the value of what I brought through my lived experience. And I was in a place where I felt intimidated, where I couldn't take advantage of the learning experience that was right in front of me. And so, in feeling like I didn't belong in the room, it made it a bit tricky for me to feel like this was the on ramp for me to like start a coaching business or a program or anything bigger than me sitting in that seat, feeling like, what the world are you doing, Vanessa? Like questioning the very space that I was taking up. And I wasn't taking up very much space, literally and figuratively. I felt that I was the only one in the room that felt the way I did. And granted, I probably wasn't the only one that felt maybe intimidated in terms of maybe the knowledge or the education. Visually, I know in the room, I was one of two people of color, and only at least visually, the only woman of color. And I barely said a word that whole weekend. I think I talked once when the instructor called on me. And I think he only realized at that moment that he just hadn't heard my voice all weekend. So I really kept to myself. And I often reflect on this. I could have left that room and not had said anything to anyone. It was such a very different path that I felt that led me to that room. And just by people talking this different quote unquote language or terminology, I could identify that they didn't take the similar path as I did. And so it was really being in that room and in that space was a microcosm of what I have seen in the corporate world. And as I, have built out my business and built out the Game Changers program, I have realized that that same narrative has been fed to me since I was a young girl. And, understanding who are the people seen as those who are, giving the knowledge, those who are seen in front of the room, those who are seen as the expert holders, the bearers of this wealth of experience. Those same people have been messaged to me, whether indirectly or directly, since I was a younger person. And I can only imagine how that was amplified for my parents, coming here from a different country, probably feeling a form of assimilation that they had to make because my father was building his own business within real estate. And so here comes a guy with a strong accent, and my mom definitely had a strong accent. So she, I would speak on her behalf a lot of times. So, I can't even imagine, what that felt like for them. But I think in some ways that gets passed down to me and gets passed down to our generation, and so being in that room, maybe I did have a piece of that with me. And to give you maybe a temperature of the room, like obviously I'm not male, obviously I'm not white, obviously at that time I wasn't fast, although P.S. I have gotten faster after each child, I would say. But I just never found my footing. I've never felt like the conversations being had in terms of the material really reflected what I thought that I knew. And what I thought that I knew wasn't really brought up in terms of the learning. But again, I didn't really key into the fact that what I know through my experience can't be taught. What I know through whether it's my family's been through or my journey to long distance running, you won't find that in a textbook. And so I didn't really understand that or value that. And, it's something that I didn't hold close to my chest. I kind of like felt that was separate, right? Like I had to almost leave like some parts of me outside of the room in order for me to be in the room, which is really interesting because I worked so dang hard to show up in that room. And I think sometimes, whether it's the running industry or the corporate world, we are cut short because we're not, in a space where we feel like we can bring all of us into that room or at that table or in those discussions. And, when we don't feel like we can bring all of us, then we're not only shortchanging ourselves, but we're really shortchanging the other people in that space. And so, I do think that the education was fair in the sense of, giving us that fundamental understanding of so many different components of being a run coach. And, understandably, it's in a weekend, right? So you are going to absorb what you can absorb, and then you test, and then you become part of a bigger network to kind of continue on that education. But in that moment, it can be really defining for some people, It can be affirming for some because they know this, they come from this, they probably, even maybe grew up in running. But then it could be, maybe detrimental to someone else's journey. Like, I don't have no ties to track and field, no ties to long distance running until I was 20-something-year-old with a child. That like my whole lived experience, my touch points to running felt so very different than everyone else in that room. So like I left that certification not with the most, biggest, grandest plan of, coaching or changing the industry. I left that certification feeling like I did something hard right now and I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm going to be darn proud of myself because I did that, and it wasn't something that came easy. It wasn't something that made me feel like I could be a part of it. I had to create that a bit on my own, but in some way I knew it was something that I had to do. There was something about me feeling like I wanted to step up to this space that other people that I care about see me in, and this was my way of honoring what they saw in me. And yeah, so that's how I became a coach. And the road only gets a little bit bumpier after that, but that's where it all began. And now, as a business owner, I can look back at all those different pieces. Because I was a quieter person too, I felt like I did a lot of observing in my life. And now that I've found my voice, being a bit older, I kind of joke that I feel like it's like my new jam, right? My voice is like this new jam I just want to hear on repeat, like I love the fact that I can take all those pieces, whether it's from my parents' journey, or whether it's from my journey, whether it's how I felt in that room, and how, as a business owner and the creator of Game Changers, how I still have moments where I feel very similar to how I felt in that room. I'm okay with that. I feel like that keeps me honest and true and really relatable to what I'm building. Because if I'm not connected to the reason why we exist, women of color, certified run coaches in the industry, if not connected to why it's important for us to have value, show value, and have others respect that value, if I'm not connected to that in some way, shape, or form throughout the rest of my life, then, hopefully that means one day that this has all been solved in terms of equity. But until then, I'm okay with feeling that discomfort, that maybe form of intimidation, because it means that that's all the more reason of why we need to show up, all the more reason of why we exist, and all the more reason why, it's important for us not only to showcase the expertise of our lived experience as equally as our learned experience, not only to each other, but more so to the masses. And that's why, like with Game Changers, I want to change that, right? I want to change so that that room doesn't feel like that room is with someone of expertise and leadership that is reflective of a varied experience, a varied lived life, and not just a one-dimensional way of using forms of measurement that aren't really reflective of everyone, whether that's speed, whether that's gender, whether that's race. There's certainly room for that to be diversified, and in some ways, it ties back to all the seeds that have been planted before me, that I'm able to do what I do and build what I am building. So when I think about the why of Game Changers, I really always tie it back to my mom, because I had realized that I was a voice for my mom. I would be with her when she would try to speak English, and people would treat her differently or unkindly or unfairly or unjust. And she would, try to stick up for herself. And not even try. She would stick up for herself in a way that would completely embarrass me at the time, because I was a little girl, you know what I mean? I was like 10, maybe 9, 10, maybe 11, 12, somewhere in that age range where, my older brothers and sisters weren't really around because they're older, and my younger brother was too young, so it really fell on my shoulders to speak on her behalf. And when she felt disrespected, she would call it out. And, she would get so red in her face, and I would be like, "Oh, Mom, like, why are you making a big deal about this?" And oh man, now like looking back, I always feel like, I didn't know, I didn't understand, I didn't realize what any, injustice was going on, and my mom was advocating for herself and for us. And looking back, I could understand that I had always been a voice for my mom. And even though that actually made me shy and a bit timid, and even in those moments embarrassed, because we were being treated differently because we were different, and I didn't really understand or embrace that is beautiful, right? That there's so much wealth of boldness that can be if you are different. And I did eventually find my voice through running, right? Through going through that challenge that changes you. And I started realizing that now that I was a voice for my mom, I have found my voice through running, and now I get to be the voice that amplifies others. And the reason is because, you know, when I think about being in those spaces where my mom's voice wasn't heard, it leads me directly to how I feel like as women of color, a lot of times our voices aren't heard, right? And I'm not just talking about like standard, like everyday conversations. Of course, you know, that happens too. But like in this running space, like there there is so much opportunity for us to take the reins, you know, for us to lead from the front. And I'm not just talking about starting lines, right? Obviously I'm talking about front of the rooms, you know, the people that are in the front on the panels, or the people who are being sought out for information and our expertise, because we have a wealth of knowledge that we've lived through and that we've learned. And, you know, I could identify that the voices unheard in the room, you know, I don't want us to wait our turn to be heard. I want us to take the reins and say, you're going to hear me, just the way like my mom would demand respect from people, because she had that respect for herself. That's the same way that I feel that as women of color, us demanding the respect because we have that respect for ourselves, you know? And we're not looking for validation. We're not looking for someone to get us the atta girl, anything like that. We're just doing it, you know? And I think it's, you know, past the point of time where, you know, we can redefine what an expert and leader looks like in the industry, because it's not one dimensional. It doesn't look like just one type of leader or expert. And, you know, that having that lived experience with my mom really enables me to have a core to like why Game Changers exists in that way. And then the second thing is my mindset had to change. You know, I really had to understand that like I know like I've always been who I am, you know. I haven't like really changed who I am. And, you know, me being able to share my voice and my thoughts, that has come with like being a business owner, honestly, and growing up. I just didn't know that that voice really mattered, if that makes sense. You know, I didn't realize that um you know, I often I often say, you know, like I'm just this Jersey girl, and you know, but that's a piece of me. You know, I I encourage everyone to know that their thoughts, you know, their actions, their beliefs, like it really can make a difference. And for me, you know, when I had read this book, it really changed my mind, because at first I was like, oh, we're going to fund 5 women of color to be run coaches. And 5 women is going to be like the way that I kind of like water all those seeds that were, you know, I felt in that certification room. And I read a book that really changed my mindset about the impact that someone can have, the caliber of thinking that we all possess, but sometimes we just don't know or we can't tap into it. And, you know, the thinking of, you know, was a Brene Brown book, and she was talking about having a global conversation, and her subject matter was like vulnerability and shame, which it obviously that's different, but the concept, right, the idea isn't different in terms of like this woman dared to have a global conversation. Like, who even thinks like that, you know? And it really was motivating for me to like, hey, you know, that lives within me, that lives within you, you know, that lives within anyone who dares to like uncover that piece of them that is just like limitless. And I felt that in that moment in reading the book, it's like, you know, we're not going to fund 5 women. You know what? We're going to redefine the whole industry. And we're going to show people that women of color can be experts and leaders in our own way and right. And that we can take our lived and learned experiences and all the touch points that have brought us to this space and show the industry what we can do. And we can change the game in that way. And for me, those were the 2 things that really enable me to stick with this, to have that understanding that my purpose on this earth is to amplify the voices unheard. First it was my mom's, then my own, and now, with Game Changers. And then to know that coupled with a mindset shift is so very powerful, because I don't have this idea of what we can't do. I have this idea of what are we going to do, and figuring out how we're going to do it together. I don't feel alone. I feel, that there's a force behind each one of us as game changers. And at the root of my core, I know my force is certainly, of course, my parents, but definitely, my mom. And so that's what makes me stick with it, and that's what keeps me going.
I have this idea of what are we going to do, and figuring out how we're going to do it together. What a powerful message to take into 2025. That does bring us to the end of Vanessa Peralta-Mitchell's story on the podcast. A huge thank you to Vanessa for coming on the podcast and sharing her running story. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you for everything you're doing to change the running industry. And you can join me in keeping up with Vanessa and all of the things that she does. I will provide links in the show notes to all of the many ways that you can keep up with Vanessa and all of the work that she does. A note about Game Changers is that just this last October in 2024, 24 new women across 12 states were welcomed into the Game Changers program, and they are now on the path to becoming certified coaches and leaders in the running industry. Congratulations to all those women, and also to Vanessa on the continued growth of this program. It's just incredible. All right. Thank you so much for being here. I always appreciate you coming and listening to these stories. I also appreciate when you share the podcast with somebody else you know will like these stories too. That is going to do it for me for this week. I am Cherie Louise Turner, the host and producer of Women's Running Stories. And until next Tuesday, I do wish you healthy, joyful, inspired strides forward.
Women's running.
Women's running stories.
Running should be simple. Just put on your shoes and go. And yet, when you try to learn about how to get better at it, especially as you age, you're confronted with conflicting advice, complicated workouts, and confusing nutrition trends that just won't work for you. On The Planted Runner, I'll share exactly how to run faster, longer, and feel great doing it at any age, because you don't have time to waste. I'm Coach Claire Bartholic, and I went from not running at all in my late 30s to finishing a marathon in 2:58 at age 42, all on a plant-based diet. I've helped hundreds of runners achieve new personal records well into their 60s and even 70s with science-backed training, plant-based nutrition, and proven mental strength techniques. Each episode of The Planted Runner is like a private coaching session on the run, where you'll learn from me and the guests I interview. You'll get actionable lessons to help you become a better runner every week and reach goals you never thought possible. Whether you're training for your first 5K or your 50th marathon, take along The Planted Runner on your next run. Let me show you how your best running is still ahead of you.